Thank you for attending the meeting today regarding the downtown neighborhood safety plan. My name is Laura Pipus, and I'm with the Tempe Neighborhood Services Office. I'll be helping out with hosting today's meeting. Presenting today will be Vermont Teacher Ita. I try to do it better every time, but I do. He's our senior civil engineer of the city of Tempe. Kathy Hollow, Tempe's traffic engineer, and also with us is Ellie Olson. Ellie's new to our team, and she's also a senior civil engineer of transportation. Elizabeth Thomas is online, and she will be helping monitor the chats. Today's meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the website tempe.gov/DNTSP. We have a lot of information to present today. We want to make sure we have plenty of time for everyone's questions and comments. We ask that you hold your questions until after the presentation. And if your question relates to a specific slide, to jot that down so that we'll be able to address it quickly when we get to it. We'll take the questions from the neighbors in the room first, and then from those of you attending online. We promise to get to everyone. Please be patient with us. Before we get started, some information on how to participate for those of you attending online. Please type your question into the chat. Click on the chat icon on the bottom of your screen, and I will read them in order until they come in. Or you can raise your hand, and I will unmute you. To do that, look at the bottom of your screen, and there is a reactions. Click on that. If you're on your cell phone, please click the chat bubble. There's a lot of raised hands. I'll do my best to get to all of you. Also joining us in the back of the room is Marilyn Teresa. Marilyn's our department head. She's over engineering and transportation. Okay, I think that covers it. Vermont, handing it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. As Laura said, my name is Vermont Ita. It's spelled German, so don't be confused. If you see my name, I'm going to walk around with papers. If it's distracting, please let me know.
All right.
Okay. So as you know, we've been working on this project for a year, really, to get the testing going. This is the study area, University to 13th Street, Party to Mill Avenue. What we're testing is the original traffic mitigation plan. So we collected data on January 25th to 27th, 48 hours of speed and volume data, traffic volume data, which served as our baseline for comparison to what we collected during the testing phase. The testing phase data was collected on February 22nd through February 24th. So again, another 48 hours of volume and speed counts. The analysis, we can go to the next slide. The analysis, if you recall the original plan, or if you look at alternative one, very similar to what we tested. What we looked at was by each device, how it affected traffic volumes, patterns, and speeds for every single device. And not just directly at the street where the device was placed, but also some of the ones that were more restricted. We looked at what it did to the adjacent streets.
Yes. Closer to the speaker online, they're having some issues.
Okay. Is that better? I can speak better too.
Yes.
And so for speeds, we collected, like I said, 48 hours. And what we're looking for is in those 48 hours, the number that we use is the speed at which 85% of the people are traveling in the 48 hours. So in a lot of these, there's outliers. You know, occasionally you get a 25-mile-an-hour street and you may get a 40, 50-mile-an-hour car. But in order for us to report that we have an issue, we have to get above that 85th percentile threshold. Actually, we go a little higher, we go plus 6 miles an hour. So if the speed limit is 35, an acceptable level is up to 41 miles an hour. At 41 or above, we have a speed issue. Sure. Next slide. Okay. So the overall findings in the volumes, the original traffic mitigation plan was successful in its original goal of reducing traffic in the study area. So as a whole, volumes went down. We looked at, I don't have the numbers, but we looked at the main north-south routes. I believe it was Wilson, Roosevelt, Farmer, Ash, and Maple. And then we looked at how much traffic came in at University and how much traffic left at 13th Street. And that number was reduced, which was one of the original goals of the plan. The next thing, as far as it's on the next one. So all the volumes, there was a redistribution of the volumes due to all the traffic mitigation measures, but traffic moved from one street to the next because of a certain measure, but still remained within an acceptable level for a neighborhood street. I believe most of them are at 500 or less, with some of them in double digits, even during the testing. Next slide. So then by device, we looked at each device, again, with the pre-test volumes, and then we looked at during the testing. And the goal was to just say whether the device was successful to the original goals of the traffic mitigation plan. And so I'll go device by device and how it affected the testing. So as far as the 10th and Maple closure, the device was successful in reducing volumes and speed in the approach to the closure south of 11th Street. It showed a little bit of residual traffic on Ash, but that was kind of hard to determine because Ash had a device on the north side and then also had the Farmer closure. So there's what do you call it? There's interaction between the different devices, which is not that different from a neighborhood traffic where people are going to pick the path of least resistance. But in itself, this device was successful in doing what the original plan goal was. Next slide.
So it reduced from a certain number to what number? Are you talking about vehicles per day?
It reduced, I don't have the exact amount. It is on the back boards. I can show you after, but it did reduce volume and speed. The 9th and Nash Diverter.
I'm having trouble with some of the vocabulary as well. What's an acceptable level of volume?
So what we looked at,
Neighborhood street.
yeah. So what we looked at, there isn't a clear guide that, like some of our standards say this is it. And so we look for these planning guides that give us an idea. And so for a neighborhood street, you want to be in the neighborhood of 500 vehicles. You could go up higher technically. When you start getting into the thousands, that's when you start getting into a different facility. So there's a gray area there.
500 per day?
Yes, total in 24 hours, correct. It is.
So, would it be surprising if putting barriers across the road didn't reduce traffic? I think we can take your word of that. Maybe we don't need to see the reason to reduce traffic.
Well, you'd think so, but not necessarily. You could see an increase in speed as people are approaching the closure and turning around on other streets. And then you also need to see that you're absolutely right. It's obvious it's going to reduce the traffic approaching to the closure, but you need to understand what it does to the adjacent streets, where traffic dumps on. So the 10th and Maple is probably not as clear because it's adjacent to Mill Avenue, where some of the inner ones, you'll be able to see that there was more impact on the surrounding streets. So the 9th and Ash diagonal diverter, it reduced volumes and reduced speeds. But we are not recommending that this be moved to construction because of what it did to the alley. It became a cut-through route. And so that's one of the things that's why we counted cars and speeds in the alley, because we suspected that that was what's going to happen. So even though this worked for the streets, it did not work for the alley. Therefore, we are not recommending this device. Next one. The closure at 10th and Farmer, same thing. It's a closure. It's going to reduce traffic. This one, we were able to track from University down to 13th Street. And so north of the closure, you only got 2 blocks. Traffic's going to go down. South of the closure, you're still getting fed in by 10th Street, which is pretty heavy. Traffic was coming in and out. Therefore, it reduced the traffic throughout Farmer. The closure exit. So this is being recommended in the hybrid alternative. Next one. The 11th and Wilson diagonal diverter had the same issue that the one at 9th and Wilson did, in that it worked for the neighborhood streets for the volumes and the speed, but it created a cut-through route on the northeast corner alley. And so this diverter is not recommended for construction because it did not meet the original goals of the traffic. Roosevelt and 9th, this closure, like the closure at Farmer, it reduced volumes, it reduced speeds. Obviously, north of the closure, traffic dropped off quite a bit, but south of the closure, we saw less traffic through 13th Street, although this one was also impacted by the star diverter to the center. So the star diverter, I think I already explained to some of you, it was inconclusive about what it did to traffic. One direction went up, one direction went down, and then a lot of people were confused about how to navigate the device. Also, this was the second device on Roosevelt, so we did not see this as adding something positive to diverting traffic. So we are not recommending this to move to construction. The closure at Mitchell and 10th, it's a minor street, so obviously this one didn't have a lot of pushback. It's not really a cut street, but this one we are recommending. It was successful in volumes to the north, to reduce volumes and speeds to the north and the surrounding. Howard Judd diagonal diverter, this one was successful in reducing volume and speed, even though it had to contend with the star diverter nearby. So this one is recommended under the hybrid plan. The closure at McKinney and 9th Street, again, successful at reducing traffic going north to south from University to 13th. We saw some minor increases. I think it's layered. Could be 9th, I'm sorry. I don't remember the number, but one went up, one stayed about the same or came down, but generally there was no adverse effect to the surrounding streets with this closure. Then I'll pass it on to Laura, and then I'll come back and talk about the alternatives. Unless anybody has a quick question. Yes, sir.
So you said many of these devices were successful in reducing speeds. I recall you began by saying in the baseline period, the majority of cars were driving within an acceptable speed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
We have here representing public safety at this meeting today. Is there going to be a representative we can ask questions to as far as law enforcement?
We
or
don't have
fire?
someone here today, Kathy, but they have been involved the whole way.
Okay, are you gonna present data on that? On safety data?
Data, we do not have that.
Okay,
We can get that to you.
yeah, well, I'll definitely need safety data regarding crashes, speeds, something that comes from law enforcement or from the fire department, and also maintaining response times in our neighborhood.
We do have that data with the response time. Data. Yes, we have that. We do not have, I don't think we had any interior crashes during it.
No,
So
I don't think we
Well, I
have.
guess I could ask that then. That was my main question is, do we have, I looked through the big data that was provided prior to all of this. So from the very, very get-go a couple years ago.
Mhm.
And I couldn't find anywhere that was a summary of fatalities or serious crashes. I mean, I'm guessing there's really none. And so I wanted to confirm that. And then was there any during the pandemic period? And then was there any during the test period? Because I can't find any data on any
Yeah, there.
severe injuries or incidents in the
Yeah.
neighborhood regarding traffic.
The original people who did the study, Y2K, did go back 5 years and look at that data, and that is in their original report that's online. I can help find
Yeah,
it.
and I read that. So I just want to
Yeah.
confirm for everybody here, so they don't have to go through the 200 pages, that we don't have any serious crashes or injuries or deaths regarding traffic. So mitigating is not for saving lives, as far as we know, because we don't have a history of anybody getting injured, right? So,
Well, we did have quite a few significant crashes on Farmer Road, people hitting Farmer Avenue, hitting the chicanes. So while they may not have been serious injury crashes.
yeah, I'm
we
talking about like cars colliding because, yeah, I'm running over pedestrians, hitting bicyclists and killing them, hitting skateboarders. I don't see that with my eyes, but I'm just wondering if there's any data.
They
on that.
have been on the arterials, so on Mill.
Sure,
13,
no, I'm not talking about that, I'm
I'm not
talking about
injured.
our neighborhood. Okay, great, thank you so much for confirming.
You're right, Kevin. And thank you for bringing that up because we did. So yes, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
Long since the beginning, but could you refresh me? You mentioned several times at the original goals of. Could you refresh my memory of those goals were?
So sure, yeah, so I'm gonna repeat it for the folks online because they're having a hard time hearing. So the question was, what were the original goals of the study, the Y2K study?
Correct. And so the original goals was to reduce cut-through traffic and address potential speeding in the neighborhood. So that's why when we looked device by device, we looked at what it did to the traffic volumes and what it did to speed.
Early in the presentation, you mentioned that it was successful in reducing the overall amount of traffic in the neighborhood. Do you have a metric as to how much it was reduced?
So in the change in data, we go street by street. And I can show you one of the analyses that we did is just kind of a quick calculation, is looking at what comes in at University and what exits at 13th Street. And so that's where we added Roosevelt, Wilson, Farmer, Ash, and Maple. So we see that originally, just to throw out a number, I don't recall, it's something like 4,000 with 3,000 coming out at the bottom. And then during the testing, because of the devices and everything, we see something like, maybe another 4,000 coming in, but only 2,000 feet. So we see a reduction. That's how we come up with that. But the exhibit in the back gives you street by street what went up and what went down.
I haven't had a chance to study that.
There's a lot of stuff back there.
And that is online too, so you don't have to, you can look at it online and blow it up, because it is, they're little tiny numbers, and it's to digest all that.
I know you said transportation is recommending some of the things. Should I assume that all city services are approving it too? So police, fire, solid waste, clutter, like any city services, they've also looked at whatever the recommendations are, and as a whole, all the city departments support it.
So yes, so during the testing or prior to the testing, we worked a lot with paramedical, public safety, and solid waste. And they were very active in participating, rerouting during the testing. We didn't really hear anything against it, but it was more, their goal was to make it work. And so one of the things we talked about is during the testing, the traffic barricades that we use can be more restrictive than what is built. So say for solid waste, in some cases, they couldn't obviously go down through a closure, but that could be something where there might be an alternative in a potential or a potential solution for solid waste to access that.
So the main thought is that if we were to proceed with some of these devices, we'd be able to do it in a much more fine-tuned way, not with the blunt instrument, these big orange things that, just aren't subtle, and they're hard to really make accurate to what you want. So if you actually do get to that point where we're going to be building, there'll be a whole design process that we'll have to go through, and we'll be working with all those departments to make sure that it meets their needs as well.
I was wondering if there's anything that's going to be done with the light at Ash University. Because so often you see, even though people are supposed to turn right or left, there is a green light that sort of indicates that they can go straight through. And even though they have signage, people ignore that. So I'm wondering if there's a lot of cut-through traffic coming south on Ash to go straight, and they just, because there's a green light, as opposed to having a right turn lane light and a left. I don't know, maybe that's part of the street.
I can respond to
Yeah.
that a little bit. The Action University signal is something that we are working on outside of this. So even if nothing here is approved, that's still something that we're looking at. We are having, we're doing some analysis to see whether a right turn arrow would be acceptable, considering that there are also pedestrians crossing during that time of year it's on. But we have looked at several solutions and alternatives, and we've been trying to iteratively test to see if that works.
And see how streetcars.
Yeah, well, that's.
And as Ellie mentioned, if you give an arrow, you can't have pedestrians go, so then you have to take more time to allow for the pedestrians, which makes everybody's waiting a little longer.
Well, the left here.
Right.
Right, yeah. So
You
that they
have to
have
stop
to
them.
phase, so there's no pedestrians going during one arrow. If we were also to give a right arrow, then we have to take directly
Yeah.
pedestrians or vice versa.
There's places where they just don't have pedestrian crossing. You have to cross. on one side.
Maybe we have a lot to get through today, so maybe we'll forge through. What is it something?
We have several other ones. We can answer all the questions.
We will.
Thank you.
Okay, we just want to make sure we get through this all, because some of the stuff might get in the presentation. So I'll just be real brief about the public input. We did receive, actually not 353, we had received 344. I need to change that number. Some of the comments that came in were duplicates from folks, so we'll eliminate those. But anyway, still a large number of comments from the neighbors, 344. 63 of those were in support of the project, and 260 were not. We had 8 that were received prior to testing going in, and there were an additional 13 that were either mixed or not really positive or negative, kind of ambiguous. Of those that were supported, they were supported mainly because traffic was less, and they saw that they were supported. That's why they liked the plan. Of
Could you
those
repeat
that
those
were,
numbers again, please?
we left off with public input. And I guess I was going to just hit on the last part, that the people that were not supportive, their main reasons were that it was either inconvenient, that it was unnecessary or a waste of money in their view, that it was either unsafe, or that emergency vehicles had restricted access, or that it ruined the character of the neighborhood. We took a whole bunch of phone calls, we took a lot of emails, we had a lot of response online. All of that is included in the public input summary. It is also posted on the website you see here at the bottom of the screen. which is the same website below where you'll be going to. I think we can move on to the next slide. And check out alternatives.
So,
Go
the
ahead.
very last comment you said, we're going to be going online to vote.
Yeah.
Who is able to vote?
Thank you, that's a great question. So anyone who lives in the project area, anyone who owns property in the project area. So that includes businesses and property owners. So if you own Casey Moore's, that's a vote. If you own the property next door, that's a vote. If you're a renter, you vote as well.
And if you're on 14th Street, you're spending.
Correct. And I am a 14th Street resident.
How did they?
That is the project area.
Person voting.
Oh, whether they are, who they say.
Legal vote.
So we will be using a variety of databases to verify that those are actual eligible voters. We have access to the county assessor's website for property owner information. We have billing data from our water bills. We have data from our residential permit parking, it's renters. So we'll be using a variety of ways.
One vote per person.
Per person, over 18. Yes, go ahead.
So the original goal, or the goal of the traffic mitigation plan that we tested, was to reduce traffic volumes and address potential speeding. And so that's the goal of our project, was to test that alternative and provide basically the report, which gives you the findings and gives you some solutions about devices that may not have worked. So with that in mind, we suggest the alternative one, which we recommend, is the hybrid alternative, which is the original plan minus the 3 devices that I mentioned. And I know it's a lot of information, but the device at 9th and Ash, that diagonal diverter, is removed from the hybrid plan. And right now, we're recommending a closure on the south side of 9th Street at Ash. This is not a given, it's not written in stone. It is a potential solution where there was a diverter, or where there already was a traffic mitigation measure. The next one is the diverter at 11th and Wilson. We also did not recommend that diverter. And so in the hybrid plan, we're suggesting a closure at Howe and Wilson. Again, it's something that can move. It's something that through design, it can be fine-tuned if this is the alternative that is selected. And then the last is the star diverter at 12th and Roosevelt. We did not recommend it because it was inconclusive with volumes. It was confusing to drivers. And then we also already have a device on Roosevelt, which is the closure at 9th Street. So we do not recommend that device, and we're not replacing that with any other device. So that's the hybrid plan. If you look at on the side or in the report or in the website, which we will provide, is what's called alternative 1. Yes.
The first sentence, you're going to close 9th and Ash, is what that means.
It is the suggested, one suggested solution to the removal of the diagonal diverter is a closure on
But we'll make it clear, closing 9th and Ash, correct?
closing Ash on the south side of 9th Street.
So you can still travel along.
You can go east-west,
Okay.
and you can go north-south. You just can't keep going on Ash beyond 9th Street.
Thank you.
The city is in favor of closing this section there at 9.
According to the data that we analyzed, it was successful in meeting the original goals. The design has to be done in such a way that does work for all city services. But as far as traffic volumes and traffic patterns, it is successful in doing what the original plan intended it to do.
I think the question though is, are we recommending one of these alternatives? Is that
Yes,
more accurate?
yes.
We are.
So I recommend the devices in regards to whether they worked or didn't towards the traffic volumes. And I apologize, I probably didn't say recommend, but put that together and we provide the alternative.
So what Herman's saying is it supports the goals of that particular alternative. So we're not saying we favor one, we favor two, but he's saying this particular device supports that particular alternative.
Can I ask about the diverter and furniture closure? The way I'm understanding you saying that still would force traffic through that alley. Is that correct? Or am I
No.
misunderstanding what
No,
you're
the closure, so the people that were, let me walk over here and maybe. So the diverter was right here. And it forced traffic, anyone that was coming south and wanted to go to Bill, use the alley. Anyone that came in from 9th Street and wanted to go north, use the alley. So what we are suggesting, this alternative is a closure on this side. But if you move south, this thing could be fine too. It's just, it's introducing something where the original traffic mitigation measure was.
Where it stops nothing.
How's that possibly stop traffic say off the alley? Just encourage more traffic.
No, like I said, so the traffic that was cutting through the alley originally were westbound traffic could not go north on Ash. So what they did was they would go westbound and then cut through the alley. Southbound traffic did not go straight or go east on 9th Street, so they cut through the alley. This closure is south of those movements, so now they can do the movements at the intersection.
Just as an example, say if you go to the corner of 11th and Maple and I want to go to University, and I want to go north, okay? I can't go north. You got a closure right there. So then I cut over to Ash, I can't go north because you have a closure there. So then I cut over to Farmer, I can't go north because you have a closure there. How do I get to University? If I cut over to Mill Avenue, I can't go left because the new trolley station is right there. So my only alternative to either get to Mill Avenue or to go north of any kind is to go south to 13th Street and try and cut over to Mill.
Yes. So the original goal of the plan was to not have traffic use the neighborhood streets to get out to other sides.
But we live
And so,
But we live there.
Is that the
Purpose of the street?
so I'm not, this is what the plan was, and this is what we tested, and you're right. In order for you to not have traffic from the outside cut through the neighborhood, you yourself are going to have to encounter some of these measures. So you can't fix one without the other. If any measure is introduced to address speed or cut through, it is going to impact the residents as well. And that's one of the positives of testing it. Because within the neighborhood, you will be forced to change your traffic pattern under this alternative.
You're just forcing traffic to other places, making it worse in other places. Correct? I mean, it flows, right? If you're stopping at one place, you have to put it somewhere else.
Yes, anytime you introduce closures, diverters, you're going to redistribute traffic.
Putting them on main roads where they belong. They don't belong on.
And that's the intent of the original plan. But you're right in that if you're in the inside, if you're in the neighborhood, you may not have the most direct route to get to that street, but you do have a way out.
So we have some people that have been really patient online, so I'd like to allow a couple of those folks in.
Okay.
Ben, I believe your hand was up first. Ben, would you like to go ahead and ask your question live?
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to say thanks to the city for the care with which you've approached this process. I live at Maple and 10th, so I'm directly affected by the closure at Maple and 10th. And just want to say, first of all, that I'm extremely supportive of these mitigation measures. They're sorely needed. And so appreciate the care with which this process has been approached. I have two questions. Number one, this was going back to public comment. So I noted there was a big asymmetry between supportive and oppositional comments, but many of the comments, as you noted, are, complaints about inconvenience. And so I was wondering whether those comments had been sorted into comments from neighborhood residents as opposed to comments from people who use these streets as a cut through on a quick and unscientific examination. It seems like there are a significant number of the latter. So that's the first question. And the second question is about the voting and the age 18 requirement. I have 3 kids who bike daily through the neighborhood to get to school and to other places. And so are actually, those who would be most significantly impacted potentially by the lack of closures, because, it's actually a pretty dangerous business to bike on Maple when it's being used as a cut through for people who are late to get places like ASU and so forth. So wondering if there's a mechanism for under 18 affected residents and citizens to provide their input.
Let me take that first one, or the second one first. Yes, we would love to hear their comments, and they can enter those in through either council communicator or directly to us as staff, and our contacts will be on here. The first question, get an answer. Can you repeat your first question? Oh, sorting the comments, yes. The comments are sorted. There is a document called the Public Input Summary, and it is on the website. So that tempe.gov/DNTSP, you can find it there. So all the comments are listed, they're included in the final report.
Right, appreciate that, and I've looked at the comments. My question was specifically about my sense was that the positive comments were essentially entirely from people who live in the neighborhood, and many of the oppositional comments were for people who do not live in the neighborhood and use the neighborhood as a cut through. And so my question was whether the comments have been sorted into residents and non-residents and treated accordingly.
So as best we could, there were some cases where people did not provide their address. That won't be possible during the voting phase, but during this comment phase, some did not give us their address and we did not. So we weren't able to do that. Some did mention that they lived outside the neighborhood, and I bolded those so you can kind of pick them out a little bit easier, those that lived maybe in campus homes or in University Park. So it's
Thanks.
Yeah, it's not perfect because not everyone provided their address. Okay, Nick, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Nick, are you still with us? Okay, Monica, I believe you were next. Nick, if you find your microphone and want to come back, you'll be after Monica. Monica?
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for putting this on. I also want to thank the Mitchell Park Neighborhood Association and everyone for pursuing a grant to help our neighborhood improve. I know they've been dedicated over the years to helping us. Full disclosure, I used to serve on the Neighborhood Association about 10 years ago. So traffic calming is definitely a passion, and a lot of it rose also from high-speed traffic on 13th Street and other areas. I do want to note that Mitchell Park is my home. As someone who grew up in a very unstable childhood, moving place to place, it's the first place I've ever been able to call home as an adult. So it's very personal for me. With that said, I lived in Howe and Judd for the last 7 years, 9th and McKemmy 2 years before that. And now I live in on 17th Place in Farmer. I lived in the neighborhood and I was never surveyed on this when I had lived there for many years. Now that I live on south of 13th Street, I feel that our input was not taken into consideration whatsoever. We are very much impacted as well. I walk through this neighborhood every day. I still go to Mitchell Park. I am, as far as legally concerned, a voting member of the Mitchell Park precinct. So the fact that Clark Park residents weren't also considered, even though we are in the Mitchell Park precinct, is unfortunate. I have never felt more unsafe in that neighborhood walking than when those diverters were up. There was multiple times walking my dog where we almost got hit by a car. As many of us observed, cars were speeding at higher rates, cutting through traffic. jumping over lawns, which I observed myself. It was not a pleasant thing. And I know that the intention previously with the neighborhood association was to create more safety. I am concerned that these alternatives do not consider any additional solutions. We don't even have sidewalks in some of our neighborhoods. We don't have street lights. I am for more safety, but the severe traffic collisions and fatalities have occurred outside. Now we're doing is pushing more traffic to those areas, creating more possible risk. So this doesn't make sense at all. And before you proceed, I would highly encourage you to consider the input of the neighborhood, the residents also south of 13th Street. In addition to, these are public streets. We all pay taxes. I'm a local property owner, and these are streets that everyone should have access to. And this is unfortunate that we wouldn't. Thank you.
Very good, very good.
Mick, if you want to unmute now, you can do so. Otherwise, I think maybe we should move to alternative 2 and get some input. Herman, you want to go to alternative 2?
Sure. So alternative 2 builds on the data findings, but does not use diverters or closures. What we're doing in alternative 2 is we're introducing friction to all those streets that were identified as potential cut-through routes. And so some of the methods that we're doing is we're at the intersections, we're proposing bulb outs, which narrow the street. So it will force people to slow down at that point. It also reduces the length that pedestrians have to cross. Obviously medians, two-way chokers, which kind of do the same thing that the bulb outs do at an intersection, but these are used in the middle of a street segment. And then splitter islands on all the approaches to all the traffic circles. What the splitter islands do, it more directs traffic to follow the circle as opposed to straight lining it from one side to the other. And so we're trying to increase the amount of friction, again, I should get a t-shirt that says friction, to the street so to discourage people that want to cut through the street. In alternative 2, all the traffic turning movements that you could make today, you could make them in alternative 2. So that's the biggest difference from alternative 1. And then, of course, we have the no build, which is alternative 3, which is what you have out there today.
I have a question. So when we vote on this at some point, what does the vote have to be, either yes or no, in order for it to move forward? So
Yeah, that's our next one.
okay.
Yes.
Just real quick on alternative 2, almost every street, but Maple has speed bumps. No speed bumps on Maple. Why was that considered?
We did not address speed bumps on any of this alternatives. I know that that was something that was addressed in the original plan, and that's something that can still happen outside of this plan. But this one was mainly to address the intersections and the lawn segments, but we did not address addition or taking out speed.
It kind of seems odd that Maple's the only one in the whole map that doesn't have speed bumps.
So the speed bumps are existing, that are listed.
Yes.
So they're all existing.
And then just quick thing is, we live right next to where the closure was. Every single day, angry people pull up to a closure, try and get around in a U-turn fashion and speed away. It completely defeats the purpose. The closure just defeats the purpose. People go faster now when they come up to the closure because they're frustrated and angry. And it's always going to happen because there's always new people in there.
Right.
Just my opinion.
And one thing to keep in mind that where the test was at a disadvantage is the devices that we use, you encounter day in and day out in construction. And we did receive some comments that people said, why is this closed? There's no construction. And so that was one of the things that we really labored over how to make these closures so that we could test it. And frankly, this was the best alternative that we could have. But it did introduce some confusion during the testing. It's something that if these things move to construction, you now have, for instance, you have a closure of Lemon at Dorsey. That is established. People know which way to go. Do people get lost and still go down? Yes, you'll get a random person. But as something becomes permanent and people learn their new routes, then you should see less of that.
Can I interrupt real quick? We are getting some questions online about why the map is not on the screen. And the reason for that is it would just be impossible to read. It's just too detailed at this scale. It will be online. You'll be able to look at it in more detail. And then for those of you that are, the alternatives are out here. Sorry. Yes, sir.
So my name is Michael Warren. I'm a professor here at ASU and a Tempe resident for the past decade. I live with my family at 16th and Roosevelt, big turquoise house. You guys might have driven. And when I first prepared my remarks for today's meeting, I realized they were angry, really angry, self-righteous. I thought about it a little bit and I realized it was coming from a place of frustration. What I really want to say here to you, representatives of the city, and to my neighbors, please don't put a wall between us. The trial period for this wall showed what it would be like. Beyond the inconveniences, beyond questions of fairness, beyond questions of whether there's a problem that actually merits this extreme solution. Beyond all this, there's this. The proposed measures, especially hybrid or alternative one, both literally and symbolically divide us. Is this really what you want? Do you really want to be walled off from the other parts of your neighborhood, from other residents of the city, from guests and visitors? Is this really who you are and how you want to live? 10 years ago, my wife and I were trying to figure out where in the valley we wanted to move to, where we wanted to raise our family and settle into a community. And we chose here because we sense that this is just that, a community. Not the gated kind, not the HOA kind, not some isolated suburb, but a community that was an organic part of the city in which it was located. Not set aside from, not walled off, a place that appealed precisely because there's life and energy and vitality here. Because there are businesses and amenities and gathering places that draw us together and that draw people from all over the city, from the valley and visitors from all over the world. This seemed to be a place that believed it's possible for us to be more connected rather than divided, and that we'd be better for it. And I could list all kinds of arguments for why putting up these walls is a bad idea, why it's ill-conceived and harmful. But at the end of the day, I want to appeal to all of you as my neighbors. Please don't put a wall between us. Thank you.
One more, and then we move on.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we should maybe address some of these people that have written in the chat. Why don't we take a few of them since we're kind of getting a little bit off where they ask these questions. This is from Jeff. Can you define the success of Ninth and Ash Diverter considering the amount of times it was torn down? I don't think we said Ninth and Ash Diverter was a success. It actually is now proposed as a closure for that very reason. One side effect of the study that it did not catch was the number of cars that ignored stop signs as a result of the frustration due to rerouting. It's really more of a comment than a question. The Mitchell and 10th diverter does impact the church parking on Sunday and the dog park traffic. Did you all look at the impact of traffic compliance during the study? Obeying stop signs during the study versus without the study. We live in the corner of South Wilson and 9th and noticed an increased number of cars not stopping during the study. Compliance.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I also oversee barricading for the city. And I can tell you, we have anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 plans that we review, my group does. And there's non-compliance on a lot of these. It's very difficult to control. in a temporary environment and also in a permanent environment. We have a lot of strategies that we apply so that people see our signs, and we try to guide them so that they do what we expect them to do as they maneuver our streets. But we're going to have non-compliance. It is, unfortunately, is a fact that we contend with every day. There was some confusion that was created, for instance, during the testing. The diagonal diverters, they still had stop signs. But if a diagonal diverter were to move towards construction and implementation, there would not be a stop condition. It would be free flow. The reason the warrants for having a stop sign go away once you put a diagonal diverter. So there was some confusion that was created, but also compliance is something that we chase, and basically every day we're trying to do something better to make it clear to the traveling public.
So with some comments, Big Walker here, part of why we haven't had accidents is because pedestrians have their head on a swivel. Extremely pro traffic calming, much needed. Another question, did the study track whether there was an increase in volume on 13th Street?
It did, and I don't recall, it was a minor increase. I don't remember my number. It didn't change by much. The larger change happened at Hardy of the two main collectors that we tracked. I don't remember, I just remember the number being a small number. And I can get back to that. They can contact me and I can provide that. It's also on the exhibits. I'm going to take one more question and then maybe we can move on to the next slide. I had you waiting.
I live on Roosevelt there, right next to the closure, and being that I'm about the last driveway there, all I had were cars in my driveway all day, all night turning around because the street terminates there. It's not a cul-de-sac. You can't turn around. So that's what I do. Coming home, I can't go into my driveway. Several times it happened because somebody's in my driveway to turn around. Just the street isn't that wide. It wasn't wide enough for the garbage truck to turn around. I wasn't able to have my recycling picked up. 6 weeks or so.
Did they fix it? Did they figure out later?
Oh, that's probably something that worked out for 6 weeks. You know, I could take it somewhere.
You're right. And I'm very
But
sorry
that's
for
not
that.
what I
That was a tough one. I know, Big has similar issues.
But that's what I would have to look forward to if we close the street. The
Not
street isn't
necessarily.
a cul-de-sac.
No. So if there was a closure that was going to move forward at this location, it would be designed and it would have the input from solid waste and such. So
Well,
that
that's
there is
not
a
my
way.
concern, the garbage truck so much. You'll figure that out. Maybe eventually they can pick it up in the alley. But I have cars on the last driveway. So, and you can't easily turn around in that street because it wasn't designed as a cul-de-sac. It just terminated there. So the easiest thing for people to do, FedEx trucks, UPS trucks, monster trucks, even people with small cars can't really turn around. They pull into my driveway all day long, all night. It's just not right.
I would like to say something. I agree with what you're saying. That is very frustrating. We all have to deal with that. I live at Untitled Maple, and I can barely back out of my driveway during rush hour because there's some cars cutting down my street. So it does take a long time for people to figure out and figure out a better way. Eventually, if there's dead end signs, they learn a new way. So it does take time. I don't think that this study, being however long it was enough time for people to really get the hang of how long it
There was a large flashing thing, several things, houses down showing that it's closed. But people are in disbelief that the street is actually closed.
Yes.
They literally go all the way to the end and they're like, wow,
Yeah.
it really is closed. I don't see that changing.
We dealt with the same thing, and I don't know the answer to this. Maybe you can speak to this and be doing it for a long time. There's probably like a certain, time that it takes people to get used to it. Also, I would imagine the city would have some type of signage on the street at some point, dead end, the barricades were not permanent, people knew that, so I think that's why it was difficult, and most of the people, I mean, I can't say research-wise, because I haven't gone through and done all of this, but I live on Maple. Everyone cutting down our street did not live there, they were using as an extension of Mill Avenue as a cut through, with Uber signs, I'm not like discriminating, it just, they were not people that lived there, that were going slow, that were being respectful.
Well, I will also say, and my neighbors who aren't here right now, could vouch for it, the ones that didn't put it in my driveway, turn around, they drove through, houses on the corners, yards, just to go right around.
Is
On the
that
side.
what they really need to do? No, obviously, like, no one should do that,
Been all day long. and all
Yeah.
night.
but I don't think it would continue to happen if.
I have an adult child who lived, actually, that's why he was 934. Any of these proposals, if he leaves something in his car, he's going to be going miles back home. This is just, there are unintended consequences for the convenience of which are public streets. And no one is taking into account the unintended consequences. It's circulation system. He can,
Time out of my work here right now, that even if that barricade is there, it's taking an extra 5 minutes to go around circumvent the barricade, so it adds 5 to 10 minutes on my view.
Yeah, I just living here for 15 years. This area has become very congested. It takes a long time to get anywhere in touch. It's actually faster to ride your bike or walk. And obviously we don't want to do that right now. But that's just the reality of where we live in Tempe right now. With everything going up around, it's changed. So we're gonna have to either change some of these things, or we're gonna have people, it's gonna get worse. People are gonna cut through more and more if we don't put some of these things in place.
Tempe loves the word vibrancy. Call the phone number, they use that word all over. It's just a bunch of adjectives. Streets are a circulation system, and if I have a blockage in an artery, I might be walking a week from now, a month from now, but I'm going to die earlier. You folks are messing with some very serious stuff that is going to affect a lot of people in unintended ways, and with good intentions. I've seen it again and again with other cities and streets. There's unintended consequences here that are going to happen, and it's very sad. And that's why I'm extremely against this. It's just.
We'll take this last one, then we're gonna go on to the next slide. Yeah.
Two introduces a concept of a splitter island.
Yes.
Modify existing traffic circles. Do you have an example?
We do, and we have some pictures in the report that you can look at online of all of these, so the chokers, of all about all of them.
There isn't an existing one in the existing traffic calming that's already. Is there a splitter island in there? Already?
Currently, right now, in the, no, there is not one in there.
So you have to read the report and see what it looks
We can
like.
draw one for you.
We could draw it.
Come up after.
Okay.
after
Yeah,
the
we
meeting.
can address that. Okay. Yeah, if you want to take the next.
Yeah,
slide?
so there was one more slide about the third alternative. Did you want to say something? else?
I
I saw
did.
that there's three.
Yeah.
You already said that?
Yeah, I already said the no bill,
Oh, okay.
leaving what's out there.
So just real quickly, I want to say, I just want to say a few things about the voting. This one's a little bit different because there's actually three alternatives, 1, 2, and the third one that you just described. We normally would say that of the people voting, we need to have like a 60% agreement in order to have something go forward. And in fact, that's what was published in our brand new, just posted neighborhood traffic mitigation guide. But in this case, with 3, we had some concerns that we'd get stuck and we wouldn't have any kind of support. So we're doing this ranked voting where, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, one is the one you like the best, and 2, and then 3. And hopefully that will, oops.
Is there a 0? I don't want any of them vote allowed?
That's number
Just
three.
vote for
Okay,
3.
okay.
Vote for
Sorry,
3.
I
Just
thought
for
there
3
was-
and nothing else.
Yeah,
So, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I got a question about the voting. Okay, now are we gonna vote by email? Are you gonna send us a ballot in the mail? I do not even own a computer,
Right.
okay? So am I gonna get some ballot in the mail or how do I vote?
So people that don't use a computer, I will personally deliver you a ballot, and you can return it by mail or I can come get it. We would prefer that you do it online, just because there's less chance of error, that we know exactly what you put in will be what is in the computer. so it kind of takes out the human factor. But for those of you who do not use the computer, we will provide.
When's this voting gonna take place? That's another question.
You get your card today.
Oh, today?
Yes.
Oh,
That's it, right here.
oh, okay.
But we do encourage that. There are small cards I left out on the table that have the website on it, so you can take them with you. Oh, and voting will go through July 31st, so we have plenty of time, a lot of time to talk about it, think about it, look online, take a look at, hard to look at the alternatives. Apologize, we can't put the alternatives on the slide for everyone, it's just, it gets too small.
And as Laura said, all the votes will be verified in the, is it
Just at
follow?
the state fairground,
What's that?
at the state fairground by Cyber Ninja.
Yeah.
No.
And then one other thing I want to mention was make sure if somebody else wanted to come and hear this, that there is another meeting tonight at 6 o'clock, same place. So if you have neighbors and family members that want to come and voice their concerns or hear what we're saying, they're welcome to come back.
Are you posting the neighborhoods again like you did when you had the traffic mitigation? You know how it said, please go on the website and stuff?
Yeah.
So for the voting, I mean, my concern is you're only giving everybody a month. I mean, you're gonna be peppering the neighborhoods with the signage, right? Like
The
the
signage
signage
is out
panel ones, you know what I'm talking about?
It's up there right now.
Okay.
Yep, signage is up there right now.
Does the percentage talks about today's meeting, but does it talk about the actual vote?
It tells you. Yeah, I think it
I
tells.
didn't
No,
receive any kind of notice about the meeting. I saw a sign, that's why.
Yeah. You know what, I can read you the signs and make them a little more. No.
So it's just a straight 60%.
Well,
No,
this week it's going to be a ranking.
It's gonna be a regular. Folks are asking me to get to more questions in the chat. This is from Ira. One of my criticisms of the test period is that there were no warning signs to drivers on the perimeter of the neighborhood, that the streets in the neighborhoods were not through streets. This was talked about a little bit. This would have mitigated at least some of the bad behaviors of people's driving. Press that for you. Another question, was there any consideration taken for bicycle traffic? Encountering an unexpected rerouting was really annoying as a cyclist. I couldn't just lay on a gas pedal to get out of the situation faster. I can address that one. Neil, that will be taken into consideration. We were very much trying to maintain bicycle access, but due to some of the problems we have with the barricades being taken down, we really had to fortify them a lot more than we had hoped. And yes, we would absolutely make it a priority for bicycle traffic to get through.
You mentioned barricades being taken down. Would you expand on that a little? Mitigation.
Would you like to know?
In short, there was a lot of vandalism. It's, again, coming from a construction barricading side of things. Again, this is something that happens everywhere. The difference here was they're not put down on the same day that they're picked up. These were out there for a while, so we did contend with a lot of vandalism. So we kept having to rethink what we were doing so that we could have traffic settle down enough so we could collect data during the testing period.
Are the permanent designs well established? I mean,
No, the original plan showed examples, and I'm trying to remember, we don't show the examples, we show the testing, the orange barricades. What we do show is some of the examples that we're proposing an alternative to. But the diagonal diverters,
closure or diagonal, that has to be designed and.
yes, they would all have to be designed, they all have to take into account, like Laura said, bicyclists, and the signage would have to change. Yes.
Would you require additional right of way?
Shouldn't have to. The only ones are the closures, but we really don't know until it gets to design. That during the testing.
So some people could lose part of their front yard.
I don't know, to be honest. It just depends how the closure is done.
Remains to be seen, but it's a very trustworthy crowd, so I'm sure it'll work out fine.
Well, these are things that are ironed out during design. Like I said, the dead end is definitely worse than an ultimate alternative. Yes, ma'am.
Are you done with the slideshow? Is it open for questions and comments or?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
because I have a couple of questions and I have some comments.
Sure.
Okay. Number one question, how much did this cost? And, you know, I never saw, I asked this question before to some city personnel. How much did the study cost? You guys said that you consulted some engineers. Okay, the public, we're taxpayers. We have a right to know. How much did all of this cost?
The three neighborhoods applied to the City of Tempe's Neighborhood Services Department, our office, for a neighborhood grant. All three combined their grant funds that year for a total of $45,000. The study cost $45,000.
Waste of money. Okay, I have a couple comments. My teleprompter. Just like to say that this whole thing's been a nuisance to the neighborhood. It's a safety hazard and it's a waste of money. That's my comment. Okay. About 3 months ago, I made a proposal to Laura and Hermaine, and it kind of got just swept under the rug. Okay, what I proposed was, okay, why don't you just remove these traffic circles, remove the trees in the intersection, remove the yield signs. Okay, in their place, just put a four-way stop sign. Okay, and on the corner of these four-way stop signs, put some red flashing lights. I proposed this to Laura, I proposed it to Kathy, Parrish, nothing ever became of it. Okay, I've seen this done in other states where you've got this red flashing stop sign. Believe me, it catches your attention and people stop. What's happening right now, people are just running right through the stop signs. They're speeding through the neighborhood. We don't have any enforcement. Okay, number two would be lower the speed limit down to 20 miles an hour. Put some speed limits in the neighborhood. Lower the speed limit, hire some more cops to enforce the traffic laws. And my third comment is this traffic problem really starts way back at Princeton University and Mill and Broadway. It really starts way back there. Okay, why don't you set up some event signs, flashing event signs, heavy traffic at Mill and University, use an alternate route, just like they do whenever there's an event at Tempe Beach Park. That's what they do. Why don't you do that? Anyway, that's my comments.
I'm with Vic on the stop signs. How come there's no stop signs?
Yeah, exactly. That's all you need.
We put these roundabouts in with yield signs, and it's a game. Who's the more aggressive driver coming to the four-way yield? No one wants to yield. It's just a game. At least if there were stop signs, a four-way stop, at least somebody's more likely to slow down.
So, Harley, to Vic's comment, to question or comment is, the four-way stops, it could be a parallel effort. We have to do a study, a stop sign warrant study, where if we have stop signs in one direction, and we want to add in all directions, we have to perform a study, and it has to be warranted either by collisions, certain type of collisions, or the volume of traffic that is interacting at that intersection. And that's just that's a guideline that we have to follow for any request.
Why is that? Why do you have to follow that?
It's a federal guideline.
So obviously we don't have an issue in the neighborhood. That's what I keep saying. If we can't even meet federal guidelines, safety standards, then the issue is imagined, in my opinion.
So we have to remain objective because we're not recommending one or the other. And the part of the test was to test the original traffic mitigation plan. And that's why I say any request for four-way stops, that can still happen. You can call me, we will add it to the studies list, and we will perform that.
Even a two-way stop.
And you're certainly, you can call it in and we can take a look at it. That's not, that, again, that's can be independent of this study.
Okay, that's good. Good news.
Her point was, we don't even meet the minimum requirement to require a stop sign, and you're talking about this. It's
The federal requirements are minimal in nature, and we're not even meeting the minimal in nature requirements of the feds. So just throwing that out there so everyone is clear on that. I do understand some traffic safety, maybe this much to get in trouble.
I appreciate all your efforts, but I'm going to give you an example of just things that are unintended consequences. When jet engine, Vic's a pilot, and I don't know about this, but the warehouse was near the stadium area downtown. When the first jet engine commercial planes came in, the noise was so loud that there was a lot of unintended consequences, and it took a whole neighborhood out of business downtown. It's taken well over 50 years for it to start coming back. That's my concern. Is that you're going to, there's an ecosystem here. The streets are arteries, and you're going to have very terrible unintended consequences. That I don't know the solution, but I know this what was tested does not work. I was with Vic on the corner with the city official, watching cars in frustration try to do 3-point turns on lawns and cut across lawns. That will, if there's a barricade there, or you do a street closure, you're going to have stuff like this. And it seems to me there are a few people at a certain end of the neighborhood who this will benefit greatly, and the burden is to be put upon the people at the north end. I'm speaking of Maple Ash. Are going to be put on the north end where Vic lives. It's just, it's not a good thing. I'm emotional.
So you mentioned, sort of objectivity in thinking about these problems. Well, I'm a scientist, I work with data. And that's why I sort of asked, right? The majority of traffic was not speeding. So that's one problem. Sort of, it wasn't really there, according to your data. So I'm wondering if you actually have some evidence, right, that there's way more traffic in this little patch of Tempe than in any other patch. And it's hugely statistically significant. Or there are way more accidents or issues with safety. And that would sort of maybe help people understand why something as extreme as walling off an entire part of the city from the rest of the city might somehow be justified. And it's not a cheap proposition. And it's one that inconveniences a heck of a lot of us who want to be able to access that neighborhood. I don't think because I live across 13th that my tax dollars stop at 13th, do they? Or my right to access a business from my local grocery store. And so I might have more sympathy for this if someone could present real meaningful evidence other than anecdote that there was a severe problem, sort of worst in the nation, for kids getting run over in their front yard, something of that level. And I'm sorry, but there's been no evidence of the problem in the presentation.
I don't think any of these mitigations are falling for separating.
I mean, what do you call the walls going across the roads obstructing traffic from
The
using?
diverters mostly, some of them are dead ends. The one at my street is a dead end. I have 4 kids, all the under. Can't play in their front yard because of people speaking on my street. So I'm not trying to exclusive or wall anyone off in any way. And I don't think anyone in this area is. It's meant to divert the traffic that doesn't belong in neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods. These are not just
sorry, but you're
downtown.
telling us on the other side of 13.
But what
belongs
belongs, that
right
sounds
to your-
prejudicial.
No, that's not, I don't think that's what anyone is saying. We're a community, we're all a community, we all want to work together. This is not, I don't see how that makes this walling people off. It's diverting moving traffic to the main streets, which are Mill and University.
So we need to probably take the last couple of comments and then wrap this up for quite a bit over the space. I do want to be respectful to some of the folks we have online that have been very patient. Ben, would you like to ask?
Thanks. I mean, I just want to add a couple of comments seconding what was just said. I mean, it's a major overstatement to call this a barrier that segregates a neighborhood. In fact, what it does is prevent movement of cars directly through that neighborhood, though it's a small detour to go around it. But I will note that, you know, on my block, kids came out and played with each other as a result of the barrier in our neighborhood because it was safe to cross the street. And, you know, the community actually came to be more integrated and more engaged. It just meant that there weren't cars moving through. And I mean, I don't see how driving from, you know, one side to the other of essentially a 4-block long neighborhood is essential to achieving engagement. Vic, who I respectfully disagree with in his assessment of the value of this project, I think it's highly valuable. You know, I see on a daily basis pretty much on foot. I think that appreciating that those dimensions of the neighborhood, which were constitutive of the neighborhood since its beginning, but have been attenuated by the fact that as traffic in downtown Tempe has increased, as ASU has grown, the neighborhood has become a conduit rather than a neighborhood. I mean, I think these are realities for the people who live in that neighborhood. And, you know, to whomever just spoke and identified himself as a scientist, if the experiment that is required in order to demonstrate the importance of taking steps like this entails having children be killed, you know, I mean, my children are the children who would be killed. That's a demonstration. That's demonstration of a failure. That's demonstration of a failure rather than a demonstration of, you know, acting in response to measurable risk. So again, I think that this study did a very effective job. And actually the initial study, which was as I recall, longer duration analysis of traffic in the neighborhood demonstrated that, you know, there were high speed events on a regular basis. You know, 15% of people going well over the speed limit is a lot of people going well over the speed limit. And therefore, you know, take those sorts of factors into account. And on a risk assessment basis, it's a dangerous neighborhood and something needs to be done, and the city will be derelict in its responsibilities, I think, if it doesn't act. And you know, it behooves us as citizens to be supportive of a city that's seeking to take measures to protect the safety and well-being of its citizens rather than being obstructionist, especially if the reason for obstruction is because of a little bit of inconvenience.
I just want to say, I'm the director. My name is Carolyn Brooks. I'm the director of engineering and transportation. These guys have, I think, done a great job with what was requested. So let me sum up what I've heard, if you don't mind. I'll start with the traffic engineering. So you guys heard about warrants, right? There are standards, best practices with respect to how intersections are treated, how thoroughfare streets are treated. These guys collected the data, the number of vehicles, the number of crashes, turning movements, collect all the data, and then check it against those best practices. And it is fair, I think it's fair to say that this presentation, this request wasn't prompted by something that traffic engineering necessarily saw occurring in the neighborhood. Right? It's fair to say that. However, there are folks living in the neighborhood who felt they were experiencing or providing us with anecdotal stories about traffic, speeding traffic, and loss of traffic. So the neighborhood leaders, the neighborhood organizations applied for the grant, did an analysis, brought the analysis to us and said, what do we need to do for you guys to test this? So at the request of the neighborhood, that's what we did. We did the test.
But not driven by problems seen in the data,
Well, correct. Now,
driven by
Now,
anecdotes from neighbors.
to be fair, there is higher density development occurring, and you know this, higher density development occurring around this neighborhood. So if there are folks that cut through this neighborhood, I would expect there will be more, the more higher density development that occurs. So I'm not going to say what we measure today may or may not represent what we'll see in the future. So I think there is, you know, I'm a diplomat. I think there's a version of the story to be told on either side of the question. So I think and so this is what we want to hear, providing you with all of the data that we collected and what options there are. Option number 3 is do not pack up your traffic engineering wand and go home. Or some of the traffic calming features, or features that don't close any streets, but add some friction, as Herman described it. So we want the neighborhood to decide, right? The neighborhood. We're agnostic. And we want the neighborhood to tell us what they prefer to see. And the last time I checked, we still live in a democracy. And in this case, we want to use this ranked voting method so that if nothing, do nothing has the highest number of votes, then the other alternatives wouldn't be considered. If one of the alternatives gets the highest number of votes, right? So it's I think you guys don't have a forced ranking voting works. So please vote. The data is available. If you have any questions, contact Herman or Ellie or Kathy, and they'll help you interpret any of the data. But ultimately, of all the places I've worked, City of Tempe is the community that makes decisions based on what the neighborhoods want. So I feel like we are not going to say what needs to be done in this neighborhood or what should be done in this neighborhood. We want you guys to tell us. So we have, I'm sorry to have cut you off. I know you have a question. But I want for folks who probably need to be somewhere else. I just wanted to let you know the next thing is.
It's 6 o'clock tonight.
The next meeting is at 6 o'clock, and then the forced ranking, Laura, or the voting. If you can't do it online, Laura will make sure that you get physical ballots.
Fair enough, but he doesn't get a vote though, right?
Well, the way that